So a few days ago, I put out a short film called Music of the Mountains, and today, come on, you know the drill, it's breakdown time. We're gonna run through the pre-production, how we shot this video, how I edited it, the visual effects, where all of the hidden cuts are throughout it, and of course that classic split screen breakdown at the very end. And this entire project was made possible by MusicBed. I'll be talking a little bit about them later on in this video, but let's waste no time and jump into the pre-production of this project. The planning aspect of this one was much more detailed than pretty much anything else I've made. I outlined the entire exact storyline before we filmed it, storyboarded most of the angles you see in the video, and pretty much every camera move and action was planned out before we actually started rolling. The very first shot that I planned out, and the one that I kind of had envisioned from the very start of this project, is the very first part of the video, starting out at Blue Hour in this A-frame cabin and setting up the exposition for the entire rest of the storyline. Most of the other locations in the video we could find and access quite easily, so just like a nice spooky forest or a big hill with a nice view is pretty easy to find in the mountains, whereas this shot needed a very specific location, and I was very committed to getting that specific shot. Problem is, when I started location scouting and looking for Airbnbs for this project, I just couldn't seem to find a good A-frame cabin to shoot that first shot in. It just seemed like everything that was available was already booked. And then I stumbled across this absolute gem of an Airbnb. It was right in the area that we were already gonna be filming, and it was booked up for the entire month except for the last day of the shoot. So obviously I jumped at that opportunity, and I'm very glad that I did, because the location turned out absolutely perfect for the shot. So I had all our locations ready to go, outlined every single second of this video, and then called up my guy Dave, and we hit the road for about 5 days, just mobbing around the mountains trying to get all of this footage. We quickly realized that we were gonna have to go back to a lot of these locations multiple times to get the lighting and weather conditions just how we wanted them, and that the key to nailing these long shots was going to be just doing a million takes, just showing up an hour or two before we needed to shoot and just running through it for that entire time, just going back to back and practicing as much as possible until we got the movement and the blocking perfect. It was a great time and a very rewarding creative pursuit, but definitely one of the most kind of creatively frustrating shoots I've ever done. Typically, I like to go with the flow and kind of make the absolute most of whatever nature and the universe throw at us on a given shoot and a given location. And on this project, that just wasn't an option. Either we nailed the shot and got everything we needed, or it just wouldn't work in the edit. So we ended up going back to the same fire tower 3 sunrises in a row to get the shot right. We were constantly kind of stressed out about whether or not we'd be able to get the footage we needed in that time frame, and there just wasn't a lot of time left over at any point to just go for a hike somewhere cool or get some cool photos of a beautiful sunset. It was all focus on this one very specific thing. So a very rewarding process, and I'm very glad we did it, but I can't say I'm not looking forward to taking the next one a little more casually. That being said, the planning and shooting were only half the battle on this one. The edit has just as much, if not more, to dive into, so let's move on to that. But first, I want to briefly tell you about MusicBed. They not only sponsored this project, made the trip and the entire thing possible, they're also without a doubt the best place to get music for your videos and films. Having used plenty of different music licensing services over the past 5 or 6 years of doing this, just nothing quite compares to the quality and diversity of music that you find on MusicBed. And a lot of that stems from the fact that it's not a royalty-free licensing platform, so you don't have a bunch of people just churning out as much music as possible. Instead, a lot of the stuff you find on MusicBed might be something that you've already heard on Spotify or an artist that you already listen to. For example, I used a track by Vesky in like the rainy, kind of moody sequence of this video. He makes really cool, kind of moody, chilled out tracks, and this is music that was in my playlists before I even knew that it was on Music Bed. Same thing goes for laxity. Another feature that came in handy on this project was just how many different options there are for sorting through and finding the exact track you're looking for. So throughout this video, we have a bunch of different changing kind of moods and scenes, and I needed to find a wide range of music to match those different aesthetics. And on Music Bed, I'm able to use a bunch of different options and filters to really narrow down that pool and find exactly what I was looking for each sequence. If you're interested, there will be a link in the description of this video, and you can use the code Aidin on the purchase of an individual subscription to get your first month for free. And there will also be a link down there to my playlist on Music Bed where you can see the tracks that I've used in many of my films, including this one. So all that being said, let's dive into the editing, starting out with the hidden cuts, of course. So there are 15 cuts throughout this video. There's one here, one right here, another one here, right here, one right around here, another one here, right here, right here. That one's kind of sneaky, can't lie. One here, right around here, here, and here. Pretty much all of them are some variation of a frame block or a whip pan, and they're kind of blended together with crossfades, masks, and speed ramping. And then there are a few that are just much more involved and are just too complicated to even begin diving into in detail. The visual effects in this project were also a good bit more involved than you normally see in my videos, so let's quickly dive into a few of the visual effects shots that you see throughout the video. The earliest and one of the most difficult effect shots in this video is the transition from the inside to the outside of the car, because this view of the road moving out the front windshield is completely fake. I went in After Effects and masked out the entire front windshield of the car to get rid of the glass, but it just wasn't looking realistic at all. And I was kind of stumped at this point and just didn't know how I was going to make this effect look smooth. And then I decided to try just taking the clip without the masks and overlaying it back on at 90% opacity, and it looked perfect. That was basically the key, was just adding it back so that you could see all of the reflections in the windshield, and it just made it much more realistic. The bats that you see fly over me in this next sequence are also added in post. We did try hiring and training some bats to help out with that scene on location, but unfortunately they wanted to work exclusively at night. They didn't like working during the day with us, which just, the schedules and the hours just didn't quite align. So instead, I found some stock footage of some bats flying around, kind of silhouetted against the sky, which will come in a moment. And then I chucked those into After Effects, zoomed way in, and keyframed the anchor point so that the clip would stay kind of locked on one bat. Then, because that clip is shot such that the bats are silhouetted against the sky, I was able to very easily key them off of the background and then animate them to just very quickly cross through the shot. So I just did that several times with different bats in the clips, keyframed several of them to fly through the scene, and we get this effect where it looks like a group of bats is just kind of zooming over my head. And then just to finish it off, there are a couple frames in that shot where I had to mask myself out on a separate layer so that the bats would pass behind me. Next up, we have this night to day transition that moves us between these two sequences. And this is basically just two color grades, one very dark and blue and one very bright and orange. One is keyframed to fade off while the other is keyframed to fade on, and you get this smooth transition from one to the other. And now the most extensive visual effects shot in this video is the rainy sequence. And it's extensive because we didn't get any rain on this trip. Every drop of rain you see in that shot is completely fake. For the most part, this is just a couple of stock clips of rain that are overlaid over the shot, and I've made them kind of move and have some motion blur when the camera pans off to the side. That way the rain blurs out to match the motion blur of the rest of the shot, which it should realistically do. And then for the start where the camera tilts straight up and looks up at the sky, the rain is actually a particle simulation that I put together in After Effects to make the rain fall down towards the camera, and I also kind of keyframed it so that it would move with the angle of the camera. I also then noticed there were a couple particles there that were just falling very close to the camera and almost looked like they would hit the lens. So I decided to add this kind of fake little effect where you see a raindrop hit the lens and kind of splatter and make this little blur on the frame. I think that adds a lot to selling the realism of the effect. You can literally see the camera looks up, one raindrop falls down, you can see it hit the lens and blur out the frame. That's basically just a Gaussian blur effect on an adjustment layer with a circular mask animated to increase its expansion over a couple frames so you see the drop kind of splatter out, and then I've just reduced the opacity a bit so it's not blurring it all the way out, and it creates kind of the same effect that you would get from a drop of water or a smudge on the lens. And then the lightning, this is once again a stock footage overlay, and to make it more realistic, I've taken the main footage layer, duplicated it, brought it above the lightning, and used a luma key to get rid of the brighter parts of the frame. So the lightning that way is only going to show up in those bright parts of the frame, in this case the sky, where it should be. And finally, the sunset in the very last shot is largely fake just because we didn't get the most vibrant sunset you've ever seen, so I used some color wheels and some HSL secondary in post to just pump a bunch of orange and red into the highlights and the sky. The grading in this video is much less intense than I would typically go. I usually like to push and pull colors kind of to their limits, add a lot of contrast and punch, but on this project, the grading needed to work across a broad range of different camera angles and lighting for each clip. So I just couldn't push and pull things as much as I normally would. But the grading process was still largely the same as what I've talked about before, so I will link a bunch of my grading videos, I've made several at this point, in the description, and I'll also put one in the cards. And finally, the sound design on this project was much more straightforward and kind of less stylistic than I typically go. Usually I'm using a lot of different kind of swooshes and atmospheric sound effects, getting really creative with how I can transition between shots, but obviously that's not really necessary on this particular project because it's all one shot. So instead, I just went really detailed and basically left no stone unturned when it came to the sound design, first building out a very detailed ambient sound in the background, which kind of gradually moves in and out and changes to match the locations and vibes throughout the video. And I also added a lot of just very detailed kind of Foley sounds, you could say. So like my jacket moving when I move my arms, all with the footsteps, of course, and just a lot of tiny little details. The timeline is a bit terrifying. I also used an audio effect throughout this video that you don't normally hear in my work, which is a high pass filter. And I used it to make it sound like different clips were coming out of a speaker. So the implication in this video is that a lot of the sound we're hearing is coming from my phone or from the Bluetooth speaker in my bag. So I used this high pass filter, which cuts out the lower frequencies and just leaves the higher pitches of the audio, which imitates the effect that you would get from audio coming from a speaker. So I used that on the voicemail in the intro, and I also kind of fade it in and out to indicate a transition from one song to the next. So you can hear it kind of gradually fade into that effect where it sounds like it's coming directly from the speaker or from the phone. All in all, there's so many tiny little details that I could talk about with this project, but this video would just be entirely too long. So I'm gonna get out of the way at this point and let you watch the side-by-side kind of split screen timeline breakdown next. Once again, a huge thank you to MusicBed for making this entire thing possible. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something new from this breakdown. Enjoy this split screen, and I will see you in the next one.
You have one new voice message from 4:35 a.m. To play the message, press 1.
Hey man, saw that you were doing the fire tower hike today. Still bummed that I have to miss this one, but I'm sure the sunset up there is gonna be ridiculous. Let me know how it goes. Send me some photos. And be prepared for some crazy weather up there. We just got stuck in a storm on the trail last week. Like rain, thunder, lightning, hail, the whole thing. watch for bears too. They're all over the place this time of year. You already know that, but anyway, be safe and give me a call when you're off the trail and we'll catch up.
Potential thunderstorms moving through, but clear.